Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents My Life in the Purple Kingdom by Brownmark with Cynthia M. Urich. Forward by Questlove. Narrated by Brownmark. Forward. Questlove. If you followed Prince's career long enough and closely enough, and I did, one of the things you learned was that he was obsessed with duality. Everything was defined by tension between related opposites, right and wrong, good and evil, the divine and the profane. Even his hometown was a twin city. So it only makes sense that Brownmark, who anchored Prince's band during the most productive and profound years, would write a story that depends on a kind of duality where every movement forward is also a movement backward, where every attempt to preserve order falls into disorder, where success and frustration are bound together, chords and discords, verses and reverses. Brownmark's identity starts with a reversal. He was born Mark Brown and cut his teeth in the Minneapolis music scene, but after he was hired, fresh from high school, as the bassist for Prince's touring band, his name was flipped to Brownmark. His book begins with a different kind of reversal, one of fortune, with Prince's band on stage in Los Angeles in October 1981, about to open for the Rolling Stones. It's a big break, a support slot for the world's greatest rock band. To say that the gig didn't go well is an understatement. It's one of the most notorious mismatches between opening acts and agitated crowd in the history of rock and roll, complete with catcalls and bottles heaved at the stage. Enough reversals, though, and you might find yourself moving forward. Brownmark certainly did. He was talented and ambitious, and he was following the lead of the most talented and ambitious musician of his generation. Brownmark moved forward with Prince through the early 80s, trying to find his place within the court of the Minneapolis genius. Was he a member of the inner circle? Was he a temporary thing? He was subject to Prince's whims like everyone else, on call day and night to record or rehearse, and that gave him a front row seat to one of the best circuses of 80s music. Prince, as ringmaster, trying to both tame and inspire the bands around him, included The Time and Vanity 6. And then came the rain, the Purple Rain, Prince's breakthrough album, the one that established him as a permanent superstar, was released in the summer of 1984, and those of us who were tracking his every move couldn't help but notice that it came complete with an official studio band, The Revolution. The name wasn't completely new. He had hidden it on the cover of his previous album, 1999, in mirror writing, but this was official. And right there, on bass, was Brownmark. He occupied that position for most of the next 3 years, which happened to be the period when Prince and the Revolution released a series of amazing records, Around the World in a Day, Parade, and Sign of the Times. It's a half-decade stretch that rivals that of any other music artist in history. But Brownmark's time with Prince wasn't done reversing. While he was working his day job, he was also launching a side project, Maserati, which he stocked with musicians he had played with back in Minneapolis. He wrote for the band, produced their songs, served as their art director, and even managed to bring them into Prince's camp to get them signed to Prince's label, Paisley Park, where they had a chance to record songs written by Prince himself. When the group's self-titled debut came out in March 1986, with the mysterious cover image that looked like a cross between Flashdance and Tron, Prince obsessives ran out and bought it. I was one of them, of course. I listened to Players Ball, the first track, written by Brownmark, and 100 Miles an Hour, the first single, written by Prince. But Maserati is better known for the Prince song that got away. They passed on a song called Jerk Out, only to have it resurface as a huge hit for the time a few years later. and they were given an acoustic demo called Kiss and worked it into something starker and stranger, only to have Prince snatch it back and record it as his own. Remember that one? But having Kiss repossessed was only part of the problem. Prince, ever restless, proceeding at the speed of genius, fired his entire band, and he worked on Sign of the Times. Brownmark's time in the kingdom was over. This isn't a long story, not in years. Much of it takes place between 1981 and 1986. But it's a deep story. It's a story of low notes and high stakes, of revolution and evolution, of bands and fans and best laid plans, of pills and thrills and daffodils. Hang tough, children, and read it. Prologue. Breathe, man, breathe. I'm saying to myself, it feels like I'm underwater. The Los Angeles Coliseum's at-capacity crowd is so huge that I can hear the roar of it from inside the limo, with the windows closed. The driver slows the car, rolls up to the security gate. I inhale deeply, filling my lungs. We've arrived. The band looks worried. This is a rock and roll crowd. I don't know, guys. This is crazy. They don't know our sound. I tip my head back and look up through the sunroof, where all I see is dirty blue Los Angeles air. I'm so far from home. We're led to rows of white tents, all set up for different purposes. Hair and makeup, press, wardrobe. The time is passing quickly with an anticipation for the performance. This is Hollywood, 1981, and the biggest show of my life. A production assistant comes to our tent with an announcement. You guys are up next. We're opening for the Stones, the Rolling Stones. Am I imagining this? Only a few weeks ago, I'd been playing for a crowd of 50 in a small Minneapolis place like the Nakarima Club, or Elks Lodge, or Sylvia's with my band Fantasy. And now I'm going to be performing with Prince in front of 90,000 people at the Los Angeles Coliseum. A shiver runs through me. It's a whisper on my spine, a hint of something happening that is far bigger than I am. I'm somewhat afraid, yet very excited. I close my eyes, and I'm filled with the feeling that we're standing on the brink of something extraordinary, something life-changing, and I want to absorb every bit of this moment. I hear the drummer Z say something to me, but what? I can't tell. Everything sounds so muffled and strange. Then I feel him tap me on the shoulder. Brown, you all right? I open my eyes. Dez, Lisa, and Fink are all looking at me. Yeah, I'm all right, I say quietly, smiling a little to reassure them. I glance up at the sky again. It's scorching hot. I'm lightheaded and floating in another dimension. It's all so surreal. I see the Coliseum bathed in red light, and the sun is starting to dip towards the horizon. I can feel the warmth radiating from those walls, so massive, majestic, and imposing. So much history here. And now the sky is deepening, changing from red to blue to deep lavender, and the people are shimmering in the heat. Then the fire hoses are turned on them. They twist and cry with bliss, feeling the cool water as the sky melts into wet droplets of purple rain. Picture this. We step out on the stage. We are all on the threshold of a dream. When I was a boy. As a boy, I lived for those sunny days when my transistor radio would pick up KUXL, a solar-powered radio station in Minneapolis, and the only station in the state that, in 1968, played R&B music. It powered off at sundown. All the other stations my little radio with the tinfoil for an antenna picked up featured music by the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and Peter Frampton. The downside of living in Minneapolis at the time was that African Americans made up maybe 2% of the population, and the opportunity to hear any music made by black artists was meager, too. My mother and I had moved to Minneapolis because it was considered a safe place for families to raise children. My parents had married in the Bronx, and I was born there. Dad was a Marine, and my mother didn't relish the idea of moving us from base to base. So we left New York City for the Midwest, settling in a low-income neighborhood where we would be near my father's family on the south side of Minneapolis. There weren't too many kids like me around. Most of my friends were white. I didn't think much about our different skin colors, though. Peter was my closest buddy at the time. I was so excited one day when he said he'd like me to stay over at his house. I told him I'd have to ask my mom. When I asked her, she said it would be okay. I was elated. It would be my first time away from home, and I felt like such a little man. My mom wanted to speak to Peter's mom to be sure it was okay, so I dialed his number and his mother picked up. "Mrs. Avery," I said excitedly, "is Peter there?" I heard her slam the receiver, and then she hollered, "It's that nigger friend of yours." I was 6 years old. Tears began to run down my face. My mother held me firmly. "Oh, my boy. Son, there are a lot of ignorant people in the world, and they're not worth your tears. Feel sorry for them because they're narrow-minded, stupid, and full of anger." "But why?" I begged her for an answer. I couldn't understand the awful way some people acted, but I did know it was a bad word to use. As I grew up, I heard it from people over and over, but I grew stronger as a person with every hurtful comment. After a while, it just felt normal to be treated that way by hateful people. I was able to make friends who liked me just as I was, and who didn't say mean things. They were cool. My very best boyhood friend was Michael D. He was from a more middle-income family. His father was a plumber. I'd go to his house every morning during summer break and was always invited to stay for dinner. His parents made me feel like I was a member of their family, even invited me to travel with them. We'd go camping and fishing, and I never experienced any racism with them. I felt accepted and cared for. And when times were tough, I turned to music to make me feel better. Every day I waited for the sun to come up so I could hear 1570 AM KUXL play artists like The Temptations, Michael Jackson, James Brown. My older sister Yvette and I would listen to the music crackling out of the radio at top volume and do dances like the Funky Chicken or the Popcorn, mouthing the words of the Jackson 5. "Stop, the love you save may be your own." We couldn't afford a television, so I didn't have a sense of what people who looked like me were doing in the world. But I did know they were on the radio. Their music spoke to me and my sister and made us forget, for a little while, the negativity that was also surrounding us. And that year, there was a huge struggle taking place in our country. Because I listened to the radio, I was aware of the Martin Luther King marches, especially the one in Birmingham, Alabama, and I experienced the tragedy of his assassination. There was a lot of rioting on the north side of Minneapolis. I learned a lot on the radio about the civil rights movement. It was both an exciting and tense time to be a young black kid living in America. In my immediate world, a mutual love of good music seemed to bring black and white together. Artists like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Sly and the Family Stone were creating music that appealed to all races. I would go to my white friends' homes and listen to music, and together we'd groove on songs that, to me, sounded like black music, and my white friends were really digging it. Listening to it on their large console stereos with big round dials and giant speakers was such an uplifting experience. I didn't even mind listening to the mainstream stations playing rock, country, or folk music, because listening to it on their stereos was awesome. so crystal clear. Spending time with my friends' families had such a positive impact on my early experiences with music. I made my first connection between music and sex when I met a new friend named Pat. Pat's parents were hippies, free-loving, weed-smoking, drug-toting, music-happy people who held big parties at their home. I was a frequent visitor to Pat's house. I guess 'cause we were just little kids, the guests and Pat's parents had no qualms about doing grown-up stuff in front of us. Pat hated that his parents behaved the way they did. It embarrassed him, and he'd always hustle me quickly to his room because he didn't want me to see anything. Boy, did I get an eyeful. Adults would often be scattered about on the couches, the chairs, the floor, quite often naked and semi-naked in various states, ranging from asleep to high to intoxicated. And sometimes they'd be doing the duty with each other. I wasn't entirely certain of what was going on, but you would always hear moaning and groaning, but the music they played was jamming. My mom was single-handedly raising us and had to make a living to support us. I didn't tell her about the sights and sounds at Pat's house, 'cause she might not have let him be my friend anymore. My mother often worked late, so we didn't have much time with her. My sister and I looked after our little brother Michael. My mom was always in search of a better situation for us, a nicer place to live, or a better job. She eventually landed a job with the federal government, and life got a little easier. But she still had to work all the time to take care of the three of us. We siblings got to be really close, because in some ways it felt like we were all we had. We'd make our own dinner at night. Swanson frozen dinners were easy, and we loved them. We'd make hot dogs or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or macaroni and cheese. We were alone a lot of nights, but back in those days, the neighborhood folks all looked after each other, so we had lots of parents who kept an eye on us. For the most part, we didn't get in too much trouble, but if we did, we could expect a beat down by any one of them. When I was coming up, parents disciplined kids without giving it a thought, and our neighbors would smack the living daylights out of you if you were acting up. Being alone in that house all the time without Mom around created some mental and emotional challenges. Seems like I was always looking for something to get into. And one 4th of July, along with Courtney, Raymond, and Tony, some new buddies, we found something all right. That holiday, we somehow got a hold of some M80 fireworks. For whatever reason, we thought it would be funny to tie them together and tape them to a neighbor's garage. We just didn't know how dangerous those things really were. We lit the fuses, then ran. Kaboom! It blew a huge hole in the side of the garage. The garage caught fire and burned to the ground. I couldn't believe this was happening. Fire trucks roared up, and all the neighbors stood around watching. We boys were all pretty scared. We thought of it as just a harmless prank, but it sure went wrong. We were never found out, but I had a lot of sleepless nights worrying about that. I mean, we burned down a garage, for crying out loud. There were a lot of good times, too. My mom would always find ways to pull us together as a family, even though we rarely saw our father. Every summer we traveled on the train to Chicago to visit my Aunt Bertha and Frankie. We'd laugh and play with our cousins as if it were going to be our last days on Earth. We goofed off in their yard, and we loved playing in the dirt. We would get absolutely filthy. We'd take car trips to Buffalo, New York, so we could visit Aunt Edna and my older teenaged cousins. They would always take us to family dance parties, the roller rink, and my favorite, camping trips. Back in Minneapolis, when our neighbor Joffrey would come visit his grandparents every summer from St. Louis, we'd play war games and have rock fights and cut up until we were tired out. Joffrey was such a fun summer friend. I don't know what it was about being a kid, but we loved to play in the dirt. We would picnic outdoors and bring a blanket and candy to watch the fireworks at Powderhorn Park. We went to the drive-in theater and watched movies like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Lady and the Tramp. We'd go to the circus when it was in town. Such fun memories. One summer, we finally got our first really nice television set. It was a huge cabinet with a record player, radio, and television all in one, just like those at my friends' houses. Though we were now on the cutting edge of entertainment technology, we were never allowed to touch it except on special occasions. We grew up in a household where even sitting in the living room was outlawed. There was plastic on everything, the chairs, the couch, and even the lime green shag carpet had plastic on it. God forbid if it were a hot day, because we didn't have air conditioning and all the plastic would stick to us like glue. New Year's Eve, 1969, my mother was up late watching her new TV. As she rarely had the time to really enjoy her television, she would occasionally stay up late after we were all in bed. Yes, bedtime was 8 o'clock sharp. This particular evening, I saw something that gave me a new quest in life. I could hear the music from the bedroom as they sang, "Celebrate, celebrate, dance to the music." The song pulled me up and out of my bed, and as I peeked into the living room, I was filled with excitement. I had never heard or seen a band playing live like this before. "Mom, can I stay up and watch this show with you?" I creeped into the living room, rubbing my tired eyes. She smiled and told me to sit down. I was so happy and absolutely blown away when I saw the drums, guitars, and glittering lights coming through the screen. I was fascinated by how all these people could get on a stage and create such a sound right there in front of me. It was as if I could feel every note being played. I saw myself there, right there on stage with them. I didn't have a clue as to how these instruments made their sounds, but I could feel something drawing me in. When the program was over, I went to sleep and dreamed all night about how I could do the same thing. The next morning, all I could do was talk about the band that I had seen on our new television set, Three Dog Night. From that moment on, I couldn't get enough of watching musicians. I saw the Jackson 5 on the Jim Nabors Hour and the Flip Wilson Show, and soon they were all over television. I was on a mission now. I wanted to be just like Jermaine Jackson. He had that big afro and was just cool playing that bass and dancing too. I didn't have any money for a guitar, so I made one out of a shoebox and rubber bands. I tore up my mother's garbage cans and put them together as a drum set, using the cardboard rolls on clothing hangers for drumsticks. And I made so much noise, my mother threw me out. She sent me over to the local church community center on Lake Street, where they had a drum set. There I was able to take some drum lessons, but it was far away and I couldn't go all that often. I was frustrated, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. That all changed thanks to the Sears catalog. My mom used to get the Sears catalog in the mail every year, and as a young boy with an inquisitive mind, my interest in the catalog was the half-naked women in the lingerie section. An addictive behavior I may have picked up from looking at my friend's father's Playboy magazines. Being familiar with these catalogs, I remembered a section dedicated to musical instruments, and I dug the catalogs out of my mom's closet where she kept them. I waited until she went to work so I could snoop around for them. I looked at them over and over again, feeding my frenzy to get one of these instruments. I started to brainstorm about how I could actually purchase a particular beautiful cream-colored guitar, and I was willing to do anything for money. I kept imagining myself on stage playing with a band with this beauty on my hip, even though I didn't have a clue as to how to play a guitar. All I knew was that this instrument was meant for me, and I was determined to get my hands on it. I might be able to convince my mom to get it for me, I pondered. My plan was to clean our 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house every day for a week. Knowing my mom came home exhausted from work every day, I thought maybe she would reason, "What a nice son. Let me get this guitar he wants." And this would launch me on my way as a musician. Boy, was I wrong. After doing all that work, I got screamed at for going into her bedroom. And to make matters worse, cleaning then became a daily routine, not just for me, but for my brother and sister too. Now we all had a chores list. Everybody hated me. It was the everybody hates Marky era. My hopes began to stall. I decided I needed to change my tactic. It was customary for all of us to sit at the dinner table and eat in the evenings. So one day I decided I'm just going to ask her to purchase this guitar for me. What's the worst thing that could happen? Just as we were digging into our pork and beans with sliced hot dogs, I took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I want to start playing guitar." To my surprise, she was excited. "That is a great idea, Mark. I think you should learn to play guitar." She smiled at me. This was really working. I was so happy. She felt that music was a good thing for the mind and that learning to play would broaden my thinking. With excitement, I continued. "I tore this page out of the Sears catalog. It's the guitar I wanted, and it's only $237 with an amplifier." When she answered, I felt my fortunes reversing. "That's great, Mark. Now all you have to do is get a job." As she smiled and changed the subject, my grin turned to a frown. I was disappointed, but started to think the next logical thoughts. What am I going to do now? How am I going to get a job? I'm too young. I decided to go to work, though I was only 8 years old. I put on my thinking cap and suddenly had an excellent idea. When I was cleaning her room, I had seen all these stamps she collected. They were called green stamps, and you could save them, lick them, stick them into a green stamp booklet, and make purchases from the S&H green stamp catalog. My mom didn't use the stamps, but she also didn't have nearly enough for what I needed to do. I planned to collect enough and then sell them so I could finally buy my guitar. The following weekend, I went to the holiday grocery outlet in Bloomington with my mom and hung out in the parking lot, asking people for their green stamps. I just put on my puppy dog face and walked up to people like a poor soul and asked them to help me out. It was working, too. I was a little skinny kid with an enormous head. My head was so big it was hard to hold it up. I had big eyes and I knew how to work them. But my excitement was short-lived. After what seemed like a year of green stamp hustle, I did some careful math. I would be about 20 years old before I had enough to amount to anything. I needed a new plan, something faster. That's when I thought of Big Stan. Stan was a giant man who would drive up and down the street every day delivering newspapers. I used the term deliver loosely. I saw that he always struggled getting in and out of the car to bring papers to homes. Instead, he would just throw them, and they would end up everywhere, on the lawn, in the bushes, even on the roof. This jumble-sized man had a problem, and in me, I thought, he had a pint-sized solution. I made him an offer. "Stan, I'll run those papers right up to the door for $1 a day." That was a lot of money for an 8-year-old in the early 1970s. Stan agreed to give it a try, but he only gave me 25 cents a day. I was fine with that. I figured I would work my way to $1 once he got used to me delivering those papers really fast. I was so fast, he even picked up a larger route. I was up to $1 in about a week because I refused to help him for less. Stan would sit in his car and listen to the radio. I ran.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?